Hello everyone, Ludwig here. Today we delve into a hypothetical scenario, a moment that sent ripples of surprise and speculation throughout the nation. What happens when the quietest member of the Trump family decides to finally speak up? We're talking about Barron Trump. Imagine a scene where Barron, during Donald Trump's inauguration, unexpectedly takes over the microphone. Nobody saw it coming. But before we dive in, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. This video isn't just about one person. It's about all of us, about the very essence of what makes America great. It's about the ideals we strive for, the values we hold dear, and the future we envision. The day dawned crisp and clear on that fateful inauguration day. A pale winter sun glinted off the sea of faces gathered on the National Mall. Flags rippled in the brisk breeze, a symphony of red, white, and blue. Cameras flashed relentlessly, capturing every nuance of the historic moment. Supporters, bundled in thick coats and hats, emblazoned with campaign slogans, cheered with unwavering enthusiasm. The air crackled with excitement, anticipation, and a palpable sense of hope, or, depending on whom you asked, a sense of dread. Amid the grand celebration, however, a subtle tension was brewing. It was almost imperceptible, a low hum beneath the surface of jubilation. While Donald Trump stood tall and proud at the podium, radiating confidence and power as he prepared to address the nation, his youngest son, Barron, watched from behind, a figure of reserved composure. He was often described as shy, even introverted, a stark contrast to the boisterous energy of his father and older siblings. Yet something was different about Barron that day. He wasn't merely a passive observer. His eyes, usually downcast and guarded, seemed alert, almost expectant. There was a focused intensity in his gaze, a quiet determination that hinted at something brewing beneath the surface. He stood ramrod straight, his tall frame casting a slender shadow, seemingly absorbing the energy of the moment. He looked ready. That's when it happened. A sudden commotion erupted in the crowd, shattering the carefully orchestrated atmosphere of unity. A young man, clearly a liberal activist, his face twisted with a sneer of mockery, began berating an elderly veteran standing near the front. The veteran, his face etched with the lines of time and experience, wore a faded "Make America Great Again" hat. "Your America is dead," the activist shouted, his voice dripping with contempt. He jabbed a finger accusingly at the old man's hat. "Your values are outdated, relics of a bygone era. Nobody needs them anymore. This is a new generation, and we're leaving your kind behind." The veteran's hands, gnarled with age and perhaps arthritis, trembled slightly as he gripped his worn wooden cane for support. His eyes, though clouded with age, still held a spark of defiance, a flicker of the unwavering spirit that had carried him through decades of service and sacrifice. He opened his mouth to respond, his voice barely audible above the activist's tirade. He tried to speak of duty, of honor, of the sacrifices made to protect the very freedoms the young man was so vehemently exercising. But his words were drowned out by the jeering laughter of the activist's friends, who had quickly gathered around, eager to amplify the confrontation. "Go back to your nursing home, old-timer," one of them yelled. "Your time is over." The veteran's shoulders slumped slightly, the weight of the years, compounded by the sting of the insult, momentarily crushing his spirit. He looked down at his worn boots, a wave of sadness washing over his face. He had dedicated his life to serving his country, to upholding the values he believed in, and now in his twilight years he was being ridiculed and dismissed by a generation that seemed to have forgotten the meaning of sacrifice. And that's when Barron Trump did something that would change everything. Something utterly unexpected. Something that would etch itself into the annals of American political law. No one, absolutely no one, anticipated what happened next. Without a word, his face an unreadable mask of resolve, Barron Trump stepped forward. His tall, lanky frame moved with a newfound purpose, casting a long, imposing shadow over the presidential podium. His father, mid-speech, paused, sensing the shift in the atmosphere, his own expression a mixture of surprise and curiosity. The crowd, sensing something significant was about to unfold, hushed, the murmur of conversations fading into an expectant silence. Even the mockery died in the activist's throat, replaced by a bewildered confusion. The youngest Trump, the quiet kid from the campaign trail, the one who rarely spoke in public, the enigma shrouded in designer suits and an air of detached observation, was now commanding the undivided attention of thousands. All eyes were on him as he reached for the microphone, his movements surprisingly decisive. "I wasn't planning to speak today," Barron's voice rang out, clear and resonant across the National Mall. The sound system amplified his words, carrying them to every corner of the vast space. There was a surprising depth to his voice, a maturity that belied his young age. "But what I just witnessed isn't the America my father talks about, and it's certainly not the America that man over there." He gestured towards the veteran, his hand outstretched in a silent gesture of respect, nearly died protecting. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the distant chirping of birds and the rustling of flags in the wind. Every eye remained fixed on Barron, captivated by the unexpected turn of events. The air crackled with anticipation, a palpable sense that something momentous was about to unfold. Here was the quiet kid, the son who seemed to prefer the company of his video games and coding projects to the glare of the political spotlight, now standing center stage, ready to address the nation. His next words hung in the tension like a knife, poised to slice through the carefully constructed facade of political rhetoric and partisan division. "You know what I see when I look at that veteran's MAGA hat?" Barron's voice grew stronger, his tone laced with a quiet but undeniable passion. He wasn't shouting, he wasn't grandstanding. He was simply speaking from the heart, his words carrying a weight far beyond his years. "I see a man who stormed beaches under Nazi fire, a man who faced unimaginable horrors to defend the freedom of people he didn't even know. I see someone who worked factory jobs for 40 years, his hands calloused and worn, building the America you now take for granted. I see a father, a grandfather, a pillar of his community, a man who has earned the right to be respected, not ridiculed." He turned directly to the young activist, whose smirk had long since faded, replaced by a look of uneasy self-consciousness. "And you call him outdated? You mock his values?" Barron's words carried a weight of moral authority, a sense of righteous indignation that resonated with the crowd. "Let me tell you something about values, young man. Values aren't trends that come and go with the latest social media craze. They're the bedrock of a civilization, the principles that guide our actions and shape our character." The crowd leaned in, their cell phones momentarily forgotten in their hands. They were no longer passive spectators. They were active participants in a drama that was unfolding before their very eyes. Even those who had initially come to protest Trump's inauguration found themselves captivated by the young man's sincerity and conviction. "You want to know what's really outdated?" Barron's voice filled the silence, his words echoing across the mall. "Thinking you can build a future by disrespecting the people who gave you everything you have. That's not progressive. That's just ingratitude. It's a betrayal of the very principles of fairness and respect that you claim to champion." The veteran, visibly moved by Barron's words, straightened his back, a flicker of pride returning to his weathered face. Around him, other elderly supporters nodded in agreement, some wiping tears from their eyes. They had felt marginalized, forgotten, their voices drowned out by the noise of modern politics. But now, here was a young man, a member of the Trump family no less, standing up for them, defending their values and giving them a voice once again. "My father taught me something important," Barron continued, his composure remarkable for his age. He paused, his gaze sweeping across the crowd, connecting with individuals in a way that his father often struggled to do. He said America isn't just a place or a government, it's a promise passed down through generations. A promise that if you work hard, respect others, and love your country, you can build something that lasts. A promise that your children and grandchildren will have a better life than you did. He paused again, his eyes settling on the young activist, who shifted uncomfortably under his intense gaze. But here's what really bothers me. Barron's voice took on an edge, a hint of frustration creeping into his tone. People my age, many of them, think they're so enlightened, so woke. They mock tradition, they laugh at faith, they call patriotism outdated. Yet they're the first to enjoy the freedoms others died for. They're quick to criticize, but slow to contribute. They demand change, but offer little in the way of solutions. The crowd was transfixed, mesmerized by the unexpected eloquence and passion of this young man. This wasn't just another Trump speaking from a teleprompter. This was something different, something raw and authentic that transcended politics. It was a genuine expression of concern for the future of the nation, a plea for unity and understanding. You know what I see in this crowd today? Barron gestured broadly, encompassing the vast expanse of the National Mall. I see two Americas fighting each other, one that remembers sacrifice, hard work, and respect, and another that thinks wisdom comes from TikTok videos, that believes outrage is a substitute for action, and that sees enemies where there should be neighbors. A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd, a collective acknowledgement of the deep divisions that were tearing the country apart. Even some of the critics, those who had come to Washington with the intention of disrupting the inauguration, looked thoughtful, their faces etched with a hint of uncertainty. But no one, not even those closest to him, expected what Barron would say next. His words would not only silence his critics, but would reverberate across the nation, making headlines from coast to coast and sparking a national conversation about the future of America. Barron's gaze locked onto the young activist, his eyes conveying a mixture of disappointment and hope. But his words were meant for everyone, for all Americans, regardless of their political affiliation or social background. "Let me make something crystal clear," he said, his voice steady and determined, cutting through the lingering murmur of the crowd. "When you mock these people, these veterans, these workers, these believers, you're not just disrespecting them, you're betraying everything that makes America possible. You're spitting on the graves of those who fought and died to protect your freedoms. You're undermining the very foundations of our society." The crowd was completely silent now, holding its collective breath, hanging on every word. Even Donald Trump, the master of the grand gesture and the dramatic pronouncement, stood motionless, watching his youngest son with visible pride and perhaps a touch of awe. Melania, her face etched with emotion, discreetly dabbed at a tear with a silk handkerchief. "You think their values are outdated," Barron continued, his intensity building, his voice resonating with conviction. "Family, hard work, patriotism, faith, respect. Tell me, what exactly are you offering instead? Division, mockery, cancel culture, empty slogans and virtue signaling." He stepped closer to the podium's edge, his presence commanding despite his youth. He was no longer the shy, awkward teenager. He was a leader, a voice of reason, a beacon of hope in a time of turmoil. "I've been quiet for years," he said, his voice softening slightly, "watching, learning, trying to understand the complexities of the world. And you know what I've learned? The people who shout the loudest about progress often understand the least about what makes a nation great. They tear down the old without building anything new, they criticize without offering solutions, and they sow discord without seeking common ground." The veteran who had been mocked earlier was now standing tall, his eyes shining with renewed pride and gratitude. Around him, others straightened in their seats, their faces glowing with a sense of vindication. They had been dismissed as relics of the past, but now they were being recognized for their contributions, their sacrifices, and their enduring values. But here's what really matters. Barron's voice softened further, though its power remained undiminished. It's not about old versus young or left versus right. It's about remembering who we are, all of us, as Americans. It's about rediscovering the values that unite us, the principles that guide us, and the dreams that inspire us. He paused, his gaze sweeping across the National Mall, taking in the faces of the supporters, the protesters, the onlookers, the reporters, the security personnel, the tourists, all of them, a microcosm of the American population, united by their shared citizenship, divided by their conflicting ideologies. "And I'm standing here today," he said, his voice filled with a quiet but unwavering determination, "because someone needs to say what comes next." He paused again, the silence stretching, taut and expectant. In that moment, you could hear a pin drop across the National Mall. The fate of the nation, it seemed, hung precariously in the balance, dependent on the words that were about to emerge from the lips of this unlikely young leader. What he would say next would send shockwaves through the political landscape, ignite a firestorm of controversy, and force every major network in America to scramble to update their headlines. Barron Trump took a deep breath, his young face showing a resolve that seemed far beyond his years. The weight of history, the burden of responsibility, rested heavily on his shoulders, yet he stood tall, unyielding, ready to face the challenges that lay ahead. "I want to make a promise," he began, his voice resonating with sincerity and conviction, "not just to these supporters, but to every American who still believes in what made this country great. To those who feel lost, forgotten, and disillusioned. To those who long for a return to civility, unity, and common sense." He paused, his eyes gleaming with passion and determination. "I promise you this," Barron declared, his voice growing stronger with each word. "When I become president, and yes, I said when, not if, I'll protect more than just our borders and our economy. I'll protect the soul of America. I'll safeguard the values that have sustained us through generations of hardship and triumph." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd, a mixture of surprise, excitement, and disbelief. Donald Trump's eyebrows shot up in a rare moment of genuine surprise, his usually inscrutable face betraying a flicker of astonishment. This was not a prepared speech. This was not a calculated political maneuver. This was something entirely unexpected, entirely spontaneous, and entirely barren. "I'll protect the factory worker who still believes in the American dream," Barron continued, his words gaining momentum, flowing with a newfound confidence. "I'll protect the teacher who still wants to pray with her students, the farmer who works his land with pride, the small business owner who built everything from nothing through hard work and determination. I'll protect the police officer who risks his life every day to keep our communities safe." He turned to face the young activist directly, his gaze unwavering, his voice filled with compassion. "And yes," he said, his tone softening slightly, "I'll even protect your right to mock what you don't understand, because that's what America does. We protect everyone's rights, even when they use those rights to disrespect everything we hold dear. But understand this," his voice took on a new intensity, a steely edge that sent a shiver down the spines of those who stood nearby. "The America you take for granted, the freedoms you enjoy, the opportunities you have, they weren't built by mockers and critics. They were built by the very people you're laughing at today. They were built by the men and women who sacrificed everything for this country, who toiled tirelessly to build a better future for their children, and who upheld the values that made America the envy of the world." The young activists' friends had stopped filming with their phones, their initial bravado replaced by a palpable sense of unease. Some looked down at their feet, ashamed of their earlier behavior. Others exchanged uncomfortable glances, realizing the gravity of the situation and the power of Barron's words. "Look around you," Barron gestured to the crowd, his arm sweeping across the vast expanse of the National Mall. "Every comfortable life you enjoy, every freedom you take for granted, every opportunity you have, It was paid for by their sacrifice, by their work, by their dedication to values you call outdated. You stand on their shoulders, and you dare to denigrate them. His voice dropped to almost a whisper, but somehow it carried even further, amplified by the profound silence that had descended upon the crowd. And I stand here today, at 17 years old, to tell you something that might shock you, he said, his eyes blazing with conviction. These values aren't dying, they're not fading away, they're about to make the biggest comeback in American history. The silence was electric, pregnant with anticipation. Every eye was fixed on this teenager, who suddenly seemed to embody something much bigger than himself, a symbol of hope, a voice of reason, a champion of forgotten values. But what he said next would truly cement his place in American history, prompting every news channel in the country to interrupt their regular programming and broadcast his words to a stunned and captivated nation. This isn't just about politics. Barron's voice rang with conviction, his words resonating with a sincerity that cut through the cynicism and divisiveness of the modern political landscape. This is about remembering who we are as Americans. It's about rediscovering our shared values, our common purpose, and our unwavering commitment to the ideals of freedom, opportunity, and justice for all. He paused, his gaze sweeping across the mall, connecting with the faces of the people, seeing their hopes, their fears, and their dreams reflected in their eyes. "And I'm telling you right now," he declared, his voice rising with passion, "the next generation of American leadership isn't going to come from those who hate our history. It's going to come from those who learn from it, who respect it, and who build upon it to create a better future for all Americans." The veteran, who had been mocked earlier, was now openly weeping, tears streaming down his weathered face. Others around him reached out, touching his shoulders in solidarity, offering silent words of comfort and support. "So here's my promise, my real promise," Barron continued, his voice carrying a weight of responsibility that silenced even the faintest whispers. "When I take this oath, 16 years from now, I won't just preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution. I'll preserve, protect, and defend the values that made that Constitution possible. I'll fight for the principles of freedom, opportunity, and justice for all Americans, regardless of their race, religion, or political affiliation." The crowd erupted in a thunderous applause, a wave of sound that washed over the National Mall, shaking the very foundations of the nation's capital. But Barron, ever the composed and focused leader, raised his hand for silence, his eyes gleaming with an intensity that commanded attention. "But I'm not finished yet," he said, his voice cutting through the roar of the crowd. "My next words are for the young people of America, the generation that will inherit this country and shape its future. And to every young person who thinks America's values are outdated, who believes that the principles of freedom, opportunity, and justice are relics of the past, I say this: watch closely, because you're about to witness the greatest restoration in American history." He paused, allowing his words to sink in, to resonate with the young people who were watching, both in person and on television screens across the country. He wanted them to understand the significance of this moment, the weight of the promise he was about to make. "A restoration of respect," he continued, his voice filled with passion, "a restoration of dignity, a restoration of unity, a restoration of the values that made America the greatest nation on earth." He paused again, his eyes locking onto the young activist who had started it all. "And it's not going to happen because I say so," he said, his voice softening slightly, "but because the very people you mock today, the veterans, the workers, the believers, the patriots, they're going to lead it. They're going to rise up, reclaim their place in society, and remind the world what it means to be an American." He turned to the young activist one last time, his eyes filled with a mixture of compassion and determination. "You said their America is gone," he said, his voice ringing with conviction. "Well, I have news for you. Their America isn't gone. Their America is just getting started." Donald Trump, who had been standing motionless throughout Barron's speech, a look of astonishment and pride battling on his face, finally broke his silence. He clapped his hands together, a wide grin spreading across his face. Melania, wiping away a tear, reached out and squeezed his hand, her eyes shining with pride. But it was the real action rippling through the crowd that told the real story. Something had shifted, something fundamental had changed. The atmosphere had been transformed, the mood had been elevated, and the nation had been given a reason to hope again. The aftermath was immediate and electric. The young activist who had started it all, overcome with emotion, pushed through the crowd to reach the veteran. Tears streaming down his face, he extended his hand in an act of sincere contrition. The old man, his eyes filled with forgiveness, took the young man's hand, pulled him close, and embraced him in a heartfelt hug. The crowd erupted in cheers, a spontaneous outpouring of joy and unity. But that was just the beginning. Within hours, video clips of Barron's speech had spread across every social media platform, going viral in a way that few political moments ever do. The quiet Trump son had become a symbol of something America desperately needed: a bridge between generations, a voice of reason in a divided nation, and a reminder of the values that unite us. News networks scrambled to analyze every word of Barron's speech. Political experts debated the implications, and pundits pontificated about the future of American politics. But the real story wasn't in their analysis. It was in the millions of Americans who watched and re-watched that moment, sharing it with messages like, "This is what we've been waiting for," and "America's future has hope." The veteran later told reporters, his voice choked with emotion, "In all my years, I've never felt more seen, more understood. That young man, he gets it. He really gets it. He understands what it means to be an American, and he's going to lead us to a better future." And Barron Trump? He simply returned to his quiet position on stage, standing beside his father, his face once again composed and inscrutable. But something had changed. The shy teenager who had stepped up to the microphone was gone. In his place stood a young man who had just changed the course of American history. Today, that speech is remembered as more than just a moment. It became a movement. A reminder that America's greatest strength isn't in choosing sides, but in remembering what unites us. This is Ludwig. And if this story moved you, make sure to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because sometimes, the most powerful voices come from the most unexpected places. And who knows, maybe one day we may really hear this speech coming from President Barron. Thank you for watching, and God bless America.